As I lay on the Moloka floor, the jungle ceremonial hut, deep in the Amazon basin, waiting for the vine brew known as ayahuasca to kick in, I was listening to the ongoing sounds in the forest around me. Chirp, 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 chirp. Whir. And I began to wonder, maybe Richard Dawkins is right. The eminent evolutionary biologist and ethologist maybe is correct in his assumption that humans are nothing more than lumbering robots. And we're programmed and controlled by our genes. And they're predetermined to be ongoing and surviving in their existence. As the first waves of ayahuasca began to settle in, I reflected on how the sounds of the jungle were somewhat robotic, mechanistic, mechanical, not unlike being in a factory. Chick, 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 chick. Whir. Then the words of Terence McKenna came to me. Plan, plant, planet. Plan, plant, planet. The plant has a plan for the planet. And are we not here on the planet as part of the plan? Maybe Terence McKenna's right. We are God's gardeners, put here like Adam and Eve to tend the Garden of Eden and to ingest of it as well. But what about all these little machine elves I'm seeing in this ayahuasca space as it starts to open up and my third eye gets activated? These machine elves do look kind of robotic and mechanical. Perhaps Richard Dawkins, the acclaimed author and speaker, emeritus professor of Oxford University, is right. I mean, he is part of Oxford's Public Understanding of Science Committee and has garnered quite a reputation doing that. Buzz, 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 buzz. Bzz, bzz, bzz. Brr, brr, brr. Sounds very mechanical and robotic to me. And these bugs, their behavior is quite predictable, limited. It's almost as if they're running some sort of software program with a few random algorithms thrown in there for variations in behavior. And if they evolved from a single cell amoeba, then maybe we're just robotic upgrades of the whole thing. Plan, plant, planet. And we just need more AI. Yes. We just need more AI to improve our nature and to eventually attain immortality, as bit by bit our decaying parts are replaced with technological structures that we ourselves invent, that we ourselves create, that we ourselves build, because we can become our own makers, our own creators, our own gods. Plan, plant, planet. Is that what Jesus meant when he said, "Are you not gods?" He was telling us we just need to become better programmers, technicians, and seek software upgrades and downloads so that one day we will find ourselves plugged in to God's mansion. A super cloud computer in the sky. Plan, plant, planet. As the ayahuasca began to take over and I was consumed by the awesome Shipibo patterns, I reflected, I suppose it's really just what lens you're looking through at life. If it's just a mechanistic, materialistic view, then really there's little room for growth. Least of all, any self-determination. Or maybe to look at life through a biological lens. Yes, things are growing. Things are moving. But it's all affected by forces on the inside, responding to forces on the outside. Chemical, electrical, moisture, warmth, etc. A rose is but a rose by any other name. Or maybe looking at life through the psychological lens. We can observe the sentient behavior of ourselves and animals, but it's still just programs and propaganda that's been input into us from our parents and societal influences. Is there room for free will? I suppose if we have a will at all. Then there is the spiritual lens. What is the spiritual lens? What is it to be spiritual? I suppose to be awake as I was feeling in that Shipibo Maloka ceremonial hut, drifting with the influences of ayahuasca in my blood, feeling more awake, feeling more conscious, feeling more aware. And not only that, to be aware that I am aware. Ha! Buzz, buzz, planet. Where science is at a complete loss to explain how something materialistic, inanimate, and lifeless has risen up to become you, and you, and you, and you. Walking, talking, self-aware, sentient beings. But maybe that's the whole problem right there. Have we risen up? Is it about rising up from the mud to become alive? Maybe they're just looking at it the wrong way. All spiritual traditions from the past didn't believe that we rose up. All spiritual traditions from the past up until about a couple of hundred years ago believed that we all descended. That we all came down from heaven, from the spiritual world. That we had a pre-earthly existence. That we were reincarnating. And we just forgot. And so our life journey is to remember. And that is the spiritual life. So all of this that I experienced there in the Amazon basin has started me on a great quest to solve a mystery. And I brought back with me souvenirs. Not souvenirs. Totems. Totems to remind me of what I was awakened to while being awoken by the patterns within the ayahuasca space. To remind me that there is perhaps a source code that's behind everything that's working upon us. And I could feel that continuing to work upon me even when I came back from the Amazon to downtown Toronto. The effect of these patterns working upon me, my psyche, and not only that, those around me could feel the power of those patterns that I had been affected by, that I had absorbed. They could feel it working on them as they worked through me. And so I became obsessed with patterns. And I wondered, is it really the ayahuasca that does the healing? Or is it the patterns that it produces in the ayahuasca space that does the healing? And if by working with these patterns, can it help us on the road to health, healing, and wholeness? When I came back, I began to acquire some of these magic eye books. Some of you may remember these when they were published in the newspaper, where you can look at different patterns, different images that are seemingly meaningless. Nothing really to see except colors and lines, fractals, just randomness. But when you work to look more deeply, you find that sweet spot where your eyes either converge or diverge, and all of a sudden, magically, an image, a three-dimensional image appears within the pattern as something of a reward, a cookie for your efforts. What's most interesting about this is that it's not just about what you see in the image. It's actually also the byproduct. The byproduct of your effort to penetrate into the pattern, to see what's actually hidden there. For one thing, it's said that working with this magic eye pattern, it helps to improve your vision. It strengthens the musculature of the eyes, strengthens the eyes, improves your vision. And it also has an influence upon your brain. It helps the brain to find different states of being, alpha states, meditative states, and so forth. So to be able to penetrate into the power of the pattern, it takes an effort on your part, some will, which then in itself is a reward unto itself. One could say the same with the Shiva mandala you were looking at before. It could look just like lines on a page. But when one hits that sweet spot, it starts spinning one direction, the other direction, radiating out, colors sparkling on the page. Really? Colors sparkling on the page? How can that happen? No, something's sparkling within you. Something's moving within you, the byproduct of your effort to work with the power of patterns. And same with entheogens themselves, working with plant spirit allies that each different plant spirit ally brings a different kind of repatterning, different kind of influence upon us that puts us into an entheogenic state. Entheogenic, in theo, in God. But the byproduct of working with the patterns that they produce is that it puts us into a higher consciousness. And so here we are this evening to come together and contemplate the power of patterns on the road to wholeness, to heal the field. And there's even something embedded in that word contemplate. As you contemplate, contemplate. Con means with, and of course template means a pattern, an archetype, a blueprint. That's why we use templates when we build things like structures, architecture. So when you contemplate something, you are with its template. You're with its essence. You're with its architecture. And with the hope that it reveals something to you as a byproduct of your contemplation, that something opens up within you a new state of consciousness. And that you can receive, as Goethe called it, the open secrets of nature. Nature's open secrets. Nature is full of secrets, but they're not hidden, they're open. The thing that's not open is us. And this is where the effort, the will to contemplate nature from a certain perspective will produce this byproduct of a higher state of consciousness and the higher organs that's needed. So, in our contemplation, let's contemplate the divine, infinite source of all creation, all things, formerly known as God. But we'll just call it the divine, infinite, creative source of all things. And looking at the expression of this creative source in the universe, we really see all sorts of duality. That the universe is made up of all sorts of dualistic dynamics. I have someone I know who likes to call it the university of duality. Because you have a universe, it's one, there's not going to be any movement. But when you have two, then you have a dialogue. You have dualistic dynamic. Which is why the Taoists referred to the yin and the yang in the universe. That out of the two, you have a dialogue which continues to produce a third. And that third could be anything from a single cell amoeba to higher consciousness. In Western spirituality, we refer to this duality more as Father God and Mother God. God the Father, God the Mother. And I remember back in the 90s, it was very interesting. In the mainstream media, there was this debate that raged about whether God was a man or a woman. And I thought, Jesus, I hope not. If God is a man or a woman, we're in big trouble. But this went on in the newspapers, in Time magazine. Everybody was debating about, is God male or female? And this got me thinking more about, what's going on here. Because we really do, in Western spirituality, lean more towards this idea of God being masculine, patriarchal, fatherly. And it's interesting that the word pater, it's Latin for father, is the root of the word paternal, fatherly, is also the root of the word pattern. Pattern, paternal, pater. And this thought of God the Father in the Christian prayer, Our Father, who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. So this idea of God being out there in the cosmological influences on the earth. Which is why I often hear people attack the Abrahamic religions of Christianity and Judaism and Islam, say, oh, well, they're God's off planet. They're God's off planet. God's in the planet. Come on, how can God be off planet? Well, it comes back to this dualistic dynamic. Because if there is the Father God out there, where's the feminine aspect of God? Well, that would be the center. That would be the earth. That would be mater. Mater, mother, the maternal. It's all in the languaging. The mystery's there. It's an open secret. That here in the material realm, the prima materia is the mater or the mother influence of God. And so there's only really a problem when you have a monotheistic model of the deity where it's just one God. But you can see in practical reality, it's split into two. It's dualistic. There is a fatherly paternal influence. There is the influence of the cosmos. The sun influences us. The moon influences us. All the planets influence us. And then we have here our Mother Earth that sustains us, that holds us, that nourishes us. And we know that all the planets influence us. That's been an ancient wisdom that's been held on until about the last 20 minutes here on Earth. But there's a number of people that are fighting to keep that ancient wisdom alive, that all the planets of the solar system have an influence on us. And one of the movements in our modern culture is that of biodynamic agriculture. Biodynamic agriculture believes that all the plants have an influence. And so you can actually get a biodynamic planting calendar that shows the best time for planting and harvesting the different types of plants, whether they're a root plant or a leaf plant or a seed plant, depending on where the different planets are. Plant, plan, planet. So the wisdom is there, and this is what we're talking about tonight. To tap into the ancient wisdom and to give a rebirth to it. So if we've got God, the fatherly aspect out there, and God, the motherly aspect down here, what is it that grows in the influence between the two, the father and the mother? Well, the first thing that has to grow is something to maintain a connection. The maintenance of the connection between the earth and the cosmos is the primary importance. People might say survival of the genes, as Dawkins says. He says it's all about survival of the genes. But no. The primary function of the forms that are growing on this planet, be it mineral, plant, animal, or human, is to maintain connection with the cosmos. To maintain a connection between the earth and the heavens. To maintain a connection between the mother and the father. Because it's through the propagation between the mother and the father that things growing. That we're growing. So the primary importance is maintaining the connection. Plan, plants, planet. And I've talked about this before, the antennaness of everything. The antennaness of everything from a stalk of golden wheat to an antelope's antlers. It's all about antennaness, maintaining this connection. Why? It's all about organs. It's all about organs, right? The earth is growing organs. The earth is growing organs for itself. And organs are the sentinels of the earth. Sensory sentinels that can sense what's going on and send communication. Uploads, downloads, uploads, downloads. This is the consciousness of the earth expressing itself with different levels of intelligence. Different qualities of intelligence. We're all involved in this basic fundamental gesture. That's our job. While we're growing up, we're also growing down. And our job is to keep a connection with the cosmos. You can see that in the mineral kingdom. Minerals are fantastic transceivers. We use quartz crystals in radios and different devices for transceiving. And if you've ever spent time on the Canadian Shield, where there's a lot of rock, a lot of granite, you'll know how awakening that can be because of this quality of the mineral kingdom to be awake to signals. And then there's plants. Plants have this antennaness. As they grow up, there's also something coming down into them. The plant grows up, but something's coming down, which is why, with biodynamics, interestingly, a biodynamic farmer will spray minerals on his field. He grinds up quartz, sprays it on his compost, and then spreads the compost on the field. So the minerals and the plants can work together as transceivers, growing up, bringing down the cosmological influences in the planet into your body when you eat the food that's grown in that kind of soil. What about animals? Animals are the greatest mobile devices going. Animal's a mobile device. With very advanced antennas. I call it a built-in GPS. Animals got built-in GPS, God's positioning system. They know how to migrate according to the seasons of the year, electromagnetic fields, positioning of planets. They've got that already built in. Their antennaness as an organ, as a sentinel. So we talked about minerals, talked about plants, talked about animals. What about humans? So how do we figure into this concept? Humans have this amazing legacy where we are the composite of everything that has gone before. Humans are composed of everything that's gone before. We hold all the patterns, all the powers of the past. We hold all the past wisdom. We're an aggregate of it. And it's built in. It's built into our physical body. Our physical body, which is the oldest of our bodies, because we have more than just one body, and I'll get to that in a minute. The physical body is the oldest, obviously because it's the densest, and it's crystallized wisdom of the past. What a legacy to have in your physical body. But the other bodies, which are less dense and less visible and less registerable by the senses and therefore by science. Science can't really register the subtle bodies that we've got. But the subtle bodies are more connected to the future. Physical bodies, composite of the past, legacy of the past. The subtle bodies contain the seed of the future. They have a lot of evolution to go through yet. They contain the future lineage, which is why the spiritual training that Laura and myself have developed is called Future Lineage Spiritual Training. Because it's about working with the subtle bodies and connecting to the future. They hold the seed of the future. They hold the seed of the new nature, the next new nature. And they hold the seed, therefore, for the next levels of consciousness. Because this ain't it. We have not arrived. I certainly hope not.
Thank goodness.
Yes, we have not arrived. So, we're talking about a seed here. So what does a seed need? We can continue our contemplation of nature and patterns. when we think about seeds, we think about seedness. Well, what does a seed need?
Water and soil.
Oh, sun, yep.
Sun.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Yeah. Things coming from outside. Pardon?
Periphery.
Periphery. Things coming from the periphery. So the seed of the future needs an environment. Environment. Because a seed can sit there on your desk or in an envelope or in a jar for years and do nothing. Does nothing. That's amazing. Just like, sleepy little seed. Time to wake you up. Come on, you just need to be put somewhere that'll wake you up. So we're going to put you in the earth where it's dark to start with, but it's wet. Kind of womb-like. And then it gets exposed to the warmth of the sun. And suddenly it becomes alive. Activated. Planet. In fact, the first thing the seed has to do to grow is it has to die. Step one. Oh, it's time to grow. Oh, we gotta die. So you can become something other than a seed. So we need an environment that's conducive for the seed to grow, for the future to grow, for the future lineage to arrive in the present. So that's kind of what we're about here. That's kind of what we've been doing in the spiritual boot camp and these spiritual science loft talks, is creating an environment and then showering people with the right kind of shower and the right kind of warmth and the right kind of spiritual knowledge that allows that seed to awaken and begin to grow and hopefully engender consciousness. That was the other part of the title for tonight's talk, is how the power of patterns can engender consciousness. Okay, well that's kind of a mouthful there. Everybody say engender consciousness 3 times quickly. Engender consciousness, engender consciousness, engender consciousness. Yeah, what does it mean to engender consciousness? Engender means to beget, to give birth to generate. And so in this case, we want to take the seed of consciousness and give birth to something else. So what's the next step once you've got the environment? I sometimes hear spiritual teachers go, well, everything's within you. It's all there. The divine perfection's just there waiting to be woken up, and I'm here as the teacher to just wake you up and remind you that you already got it all. You don't need anything else from this world of Maya. And when I remind you that, then poof, you'll be self-realized. I call that pseudo-Buddha babble. Kind of oversimplified, dumbed down for mass consumption, spiritual piety. But seeds don't work that way. Plan, plant, planet. A seed has the plan to grow the plant. But once that seed gets activated, it's got to build. It's got to build itself. It's got to edify itself with substance that comes from outside. It's got the plan inside itself. It's got the template. It's got the blueprint. But the seed has to draw its nourishment and its building blocks from outside of itself, from the environment. It's all derived from the outside. So when people say that, oh, you got it all within you, like, just remember that, wake up, poof, you're self-realized. Let's go. Pseudo-Buddha babble. Say pseudo-Buddha babble 3 times quickly. Pseudo-Buddha babble, pseudo-Buddha babble, pseudo-Buddha babble. Yeah, you can go home and write it on your mirror. Because it's all under the umbrella term of initiation. Initiation. Leading to activation. And so, as the seed within the environment that's conducive to growth, and it begins to germinate and begins to move, and it starts to draw from the environment, it starts to draw from the experiences it has, it's so it can become a better organ for the planet. Because it has the plan within its center, but then it has to move out towards the periphery. And you see that so beautifully in plants. Plants are moving towards the periphery. If a plant wasn't planted, I'm sure it would just fly off the earth towards the sun. Because that's what it's headed towards, is the periphery. The sun and the other planets. As a matter of fact, the ancients looked out at the periphery and they called it the Great Dome. They thought that the celestial tapestry out there was like a great dome that surrounded the earth. Great peripheral thing. And they felt like the head of the human being just fits into that dome. That the top of the head has its shape because of the domeness of the sky. But between this periphery and the center, there's something that arises in the middle. The middle. And science cannot explain how this happens, how life has emerged in the middle between mater, mother, and pater, father, sky. They can't explain how this manifests. They can barely explain what's going on, because science is really just looking at the surface. They're really just looking at the outside of things. Actually, I think it's the other way around. I think science is actually looking at the inside of an eggshell. Science is just looking at the inside of the eggshell, and the egg has to get cracked open so you can see what's really on the outside of the egg. Where the source, where, the thing that's incubating us exists. So in the Taoist wisdom, they talk about this thing that manifests, that appears in the middle, is between heaven and earth. The heavens and the earth. So what is heaven? Heaven is, you can't define heaven, but you can characterize what we think of as heaven as something that's timeless. It's eternal. And it's everlasting. Forever and ever, amen. That's how the Lord's Prayer ends. Forever and ever, amen. Because you're talking to God the Father out there. It's like, forever and ever. In contrast, Earth is a time organism. It has time. And that's some more pseudo-Buddha Bible I hear sometimes. People go, oh yeah, time doesn't exist. Yeah, time doesn't exist. It's just a human construct. So, throw away your watches and stuff like that. Well, I just kind of have to plug my ears when I hear that, because it makes me wince, and it doesn't really help the spiritual movement when people walk around saying time doesn't exist, because rational thinking people are going to go, New Age flake, because time does exist on this plane of existence.
I'm thankful for it. Sheesh.
We should be thankful for time, and we should be thankful for space, because they really are a gift of the infinite, timeless, creative source of all existence, formerly known as God, has given us time and space so that we can develop as beings. So we are subject to time. Earth has a beginning, Earth presumably will have an end, and everything on it has a beginning and the end. And goes through stages and cycles of time. So really, if people say that they don't believe in time, we just say, well, yeah, we descended from a timeless place into a place of time, and that it's a time-sensitive planet. Things are time-sensitive here. And while we're here, we need to draw up and in from the environment of the earth, because there's a seed that's been planted in the earth, in you and me. So the next step in moving forward with this is kind of a paradox, because originally we were a product of mommy and daddy, the father and the mother, pater, mater, and out of that two-ness, out of that duality of your mommy and daddy, gave birth to a third, and that's you. But now, in terms of our spiritual future lineage, we have to wean off the past lineages. We have to wean off the lineages of the past. We have to wean off our blood lineages. We have to wean off our ethnicities and our racial ties to the past. That's what brought us to this point. But that's past lineage. That's stuff of the earth growing up. But there's something that wants to grow down, and if we're blocking it with these old blood, racial, ethnic lineages, we're going to miss catching the ball from the future. Plan, plant, planet. There's a plan for the plant on this planet. So if we're weaning off the past influences of mommy and daddy and everything behind them, we now need to enlist the mother and father forces of the universe. That's our future parenting. We have to connect with the duality of the mother and father forces of life in the universe, and we have to invoke them. As the child, we have to invoke the parents. Before it was the parents that produced the child, now the child has to, in a sense, produce the parents. That's why we keep creating and recreating God. It's because we need a parent. And in the past, the Abrahamic religions needed a father, paternal God. Now we're pendulum swinging the other way, and we're creating more of a maternal, feminine God. But that's all part of the seed within finding its parenting into the future. Because we have to be born again. That's what Jesus said when he talked to Nicodemus and said, unless you be born again, you won't be able to enter in to the kingdom of heaven. If we're going to enter into the spiritual world, we have to give birth to our spiritual self. And it's calling from the future. Hey, wake up! You're on Earth, you're in a good environment to wake up and grow, so get on it, because it's a time-sensitive plant. So, what do we got to work with here in terms of the environment? Well, we have the elements, right? The seed, when planted into the earth, it's got the earth element, needs the water element, it needs air, for oxygen, and it needs warmth. So there's the four elements as described by Greek wisdom: earth, water, air, and fire. And so, yeah, how do we interact with those four elements on a spiritual level? I'm a fan of a book called How to Know the Higher Worlds by Rudolf Steiner. It talks about the modern path of initiation. And he talks of trials in the earth. Trials of water, trials of air, trials of fire. Going through these ordeals or these tribulations. It's not as heavy as they sound because we're going through them all the time. Anyways, whether you recognize them or not, we're going through fire ordeals and air ordeals and water ordeals here on the earth. So it's going through spiritual initiation with different qualities of these elements that supports the initiation and activation. And the development of our nature. So let's take a moment to contemplate the qualities of the different elements. Say, for example, I had a rock here. If I threw the rock over, what might happen? You could catch it, or it might hit you in the eye and give you a bruise, because it's a solid hitting a solid. A rock is solid. Or it might not make it that far, it might fall down and hit one of the crystal bowls and shatter one of the crystal bowls. Because it's a solid hitting a solid. And a solid goes down because it's subject to gravity. Unless you pounded the solid and then it disintegrated, and then you could maybe throw it up in the air like dust. And then some wind can come along and blow the dust. Because that's what wind does. Air does not go to the ground. Unless it's cold. But if it's warmed, it goes up. If it's cold, it goes down. That's the difference between a solid and something that's gaseous. Gas can float, depending on the influence of heat. What about liquid? Same as... Well, it kind of stands between gas and solid, because if I had a jug of water and I tipped it like that...
If it's cold, yes, it goes down. But if you heat it up, it goes up.
Right. It would act like a solid. It would be subject to gravity if it's cold. But if it got heated up by the sun or something, it would float and dissipate. But it would dissipate like gas. Yeah, becomes gas. But if it's cold, it does the opposite. It coagulates. You ever see beads of water? Like they all like to join together and make a bigger bead. But if you heated it up, they'd separate and jump around and disappear. Because it's then subject to levity. Because the warmth of light is levity. It's the opposite of gravity. And you see that with a flame. If I had a flame here, well, there's a flame over there. It doesn't point down. It points up. So we see the characteristics of these four different elements. And I've enjoyed a lot of time in my life just contemplating the four elements. Not only have I learned something about the four elements, but the byproduct has been that something's unlocked in me. Remember what I was saying before, when you look at those patterns, you look at the magic eye, you take entheogens, it's not only about the patterns, it's the byproduct is how it develops something in you. And so I encourage you to do that, to spend time contemplating the behavior and nature of the four different elements, each in their own way, and how they overlap and how they interact. Because we have 4 bodies, and they have those qualities. We have a solid body, a physical body. We have a watery type body, that's the ether body, etheric body, the prana body or the chi body. And then we have an astral body, which is got more of an air quality, has more of that air-like mobility. It's connected more to up there. The physical body is connected more to here, the ether body is more connected to here, the astral body is more connected to the star world. That's why it's called astral. It's a star body. And then there is the self, the spirit self, capital E, ego, which has more of a fire nature because it has the light and the warmth of fire. Our spirit has light and warmth in it. So, understanding the patterns, the patterned behavior of the 4 different elements is unlocking a big key to who we are as composites of everything. And our personalities will be an expression of how we're configured amongst these different qualities, these different elements. The Greeks also talked about the 4 temperaments based on the 4 elements. There's the melancholic, the phlegmatic, the sanguine, and the choleric. So the melancholic is more connected to the solid, to the physical body, to the bony skeleton. And melancholics have that kind of bony physical structure, and sometimes melancholics look like they're just about to fall over and like a corpse about to just give up the ghost. You've seen, those bony melancholic types that kind of like one, it's like look like they got 1 foot in the grave.
Yeah.
I'm a bit melancholic, my bony structure, and there's certain benefits to that. I won't go into a big description about the temperaments, but I did record a talk that's on the channel called Your Personality, the Root of All Evil. And that's where I described the 4 different temperaments. So there's the melancholic, and then there's the phlegmatic temperament. They're more watery. They like rhythm. They like regularity. And like water, they like to join together. They like to coagulate with other phlegmatics. Sense of connectedness. And let's all get together and do something that feels good. Yeah, we'll go for dinner and a movie and then dancing and then home for a nice night's sleep. Yeah. Then there's the sanguine. More airy. The sanguine is more airy, more mercurial. Like to move around in unpredictable ways. And they disappear, and then they're back again. And they like to get other people moving too. Come on, let's go, everybody. We're going to the movies. Come on, get that phlegmatic butt off the ground there and get moving. And then there's the choleric temperament, more connected to fire. And like fire, they like to be seen. They like to shine. And they like to inspire others with warmth. Well, opening the eyes of the soul. But working, contemplating, not only allows you to see the open secrets of nature, it's growing the organs within you in the subtle bodies, which are the seed of the future. This is why we want to work with the power of patterns. It's not just because you get the prize of seeing something, but you've opened something, you've developed something in yourself, which is why we're here. We're here to develop ourselves as organs, sentinels, embodiment of consciousness of the earth, and working for the earth. So, back to this idea of the university of duality, and everything's working with sets of opposites and complementary couplings, and often there's a tension between the opposites. Learning to work with that tension with opposites allows that third to emerge from the middle. We see that between day and night, and this dynamic duality between light and dark, which produces not only a third, it produces really a whole spectrum, because you get one third, you get another third, you get another third, another third, and you end up with a whole spectrum. And that's what we get from this duality of light and dark. The German philosopher scientist Goethe, he talked about the in a very living way, light and dark is wrestling with one another, and that's what produces color. This is Goethe's color theory, as opposed to Newton's color theory. And at sunrise, there's this overcoming of darkness with the light, and we see these magnificent colors in the morning. Same thing at sunset. Darkness is overcoming light, producing other colors. This light and dark produces warmth and cold, produces life and death, inner and outer, centripetal, centrifugal. These are just a few of the pairs of opposites that are at work in the university of duality, and also straight and curved. There's only two kinds of lines in the world. Only two kinds. It's either straight or curved. In fact, there's actually no such thing as a perfectly straight line. That's just an idea. The idea of a straight line is just an idea. You'll never find a perfectly straight line on this plane of existence, because you'll always be able to make it even more perfect, infinitely more perfect. But everything that's in the manifest realm is being produced out of duality of straight and curved lines. And a straight line has a different quality than a curved line. A curved line has a different quality from a straight line. But when they work together, they produce the quality of the spiral. Because the spiral is a line that's trying to go straight from a center out to the periphery, but there's a counterforce. And so as it loses its strength from the center, it then no longer is a straight line, becomes a curved line. But it's still trying to become a straight line. But it has to acquiesce to this counterforce. And so this causes spirals. And a spiral is not just a drawing as you see on a piece of paper. A spiral is a living dynamic. It's a living force. It's not just a geometric figure. A spiral is a living force that produces what we see here in nature. It produces the snail shell and produces tornadoes. It's produced us. We have this spiral at the top of our head. Even your arm, when you reach out, it has this spiraling gesture. This, sometimes known as the Fibonacci sequence, is seen in so many different things. The antelope horns, even the way your toilet flushes, it's subject to this spiraling gesture of the universe. The spiral is the fundamental gesture, because the universe is made up of this duality of straight forces and counter forces and curved forces. So at the center of it all, at least your center, and your center, and your center, and your center, all your centers, is your heart. And if you have a good look at the heart also has this spiral gesture in it. Because the magnificent universe with its spiraling force has given birth to you. And at the center of you is this heart with a spiral gesture, so that when blood comes into it, the heart then sends it out, spiraling down the arteries. And this is really just the physical level. We also have the etheric heart. And the etheric heart is taking in the ethers from the universe into ourselves and then spiraling them back out. That's why tomorrow I'm going to California to a workshop called The Etheric Heart and Healing. It's working with the forces of the etheric heart for health and healing and combating disease in the best way possible by working with the etheric forces of your etheric heart. One has to actually touch on the subject of Kundalini as well when we talk about the spiral. We have the spiraling heart. What is the Kundalini? The Kundalini is also thought of as this spiraling gesture, this coiled serpent, coiled 3.5 times, sitting in the pelvic region, which on a physical level is the region of the will. So even on our will, we have this spiraling gesture. And when we awaken Kundalini, we will feel this serpentine energy working through us, very flowing, spiraling, the will of the universe working through us as Kundalini. We see this spiral in plants. The way a plant grows, it doesn't go straight out from the center up to the sun, but spirals. You can look at the shape of a tree or a flower or a stalk of wheat, because it's subject to the spiraling that's going on around the earth. And I call it plant Kundalini. Plants are just living Kundalini. And to speak of Goethe once again, because Goethe was a scientist who spent a lot of time contemplating plants. Matter of fact, he's got a whole book called The Archetypal Plant. And in fact, he says there's only one plant. There's only one plant on the planet with a plan. And the plan is to be as many different expressions of plantness as possible. So he observed and described all the different types of leaves that you can see on plants, from a pine needle to a palm frond. They're all leaves. Different expressions of leafness from plantness from the one archetypal plant that spirals out in a myriad number of forms and patterns. Which is why when we ingest the vegetal of the vegelistas, vegelistas is the name of the shamans in the Peruvian tradition. So just to talk a bit, we talked about plants, just to talk a bit more about patterns in animals. And we can see it, of course, in their form. We can see it in their migration habits. I was sitting watching some ducks by a pond a little while back, and you can tell the difference between a male duck and a female duck by the way they're patterned, the way they're colored. The male has a distinct coloration and the female has a different one. And yet, even though you can tell it's a duck, no two ducks are going to have the exact same patterning and coloration. This is the beauty of it. Even though there are patterns that are locked in, there's also infinite variations on the theme and watching their behavior. A duck will act like a duck. A duck will not act like a dog. You can tell it's a duck, you know, because it goes quack. Dog doesn't go quack. Right? But no two ducks are going to quack the exact same way. Every moment in time where it's unfolding, there's going to be uniqueness even within the patterns. And same with instincts. We need to talk about instinctual behavior, because instinctual behavior is another form of pattern. It's not a visual pattern, it's an expressive pattern. And, what is an instinct? An instinct is an impulse, it's a prompting that takes place at the instigation of something that impels it from the outside, impels it to action. But the difference between an instinct and an intuition, this is kind of interesting, is that an instinct is said to be more blind, right? That the end is not consciously recognized by the animal when it's acting on an instinct, right? Like if I frightened a bird and it instinctually flew off, it might fly into a wall because it's just acting on fear and instinct, but it's somewhat blind to what the end is going to be. Whereas an intuition is not something coming from the past, instinct, it's something coming from the future. An intuition has an end view, it's something that's guiding us into the future, whereas an instinct is pushing us from the past. So humans have both. This is the amazing thing about human. We do have this animal-like quality of instincts and pattern behavior, but if we're driven by instincts, driven by fear, driven by any of the drives to eat and have shelter and have community and to reproduce, they're all kind of blind. They could all lead to bad things possibly, especially when people are out looking for a mate instinctually, running blind at times, whereas an intuition is coming from a different level of the human being. It's not so much from the physical and the life body, it's coming more from the higher members of the astral and the spirit self, and can lead us into the future and lead us into a known destination. So, let's talk about the human now. This human being a composite of all these things that have gone before. We've got the mineral body, we've got the plant body, we've got an animal body. But then we've got the subtle bodies as well. For example, with the chakras. The chakras in the subtle bodies that are organs. We're back to this thing about organs. Chakras are organs in the subtle bodies, organs of higher perception. They're not organs like your eyeballs or your earballs or any of your senses, but organs for higher perception, because they're on the subtle body, they can connect with the subtle worlds. But we can see how even things on the physical level, patterns on the physical level, can lead to shifts in our states of consciousness. And I think one of the most dramatic is that of the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is a pattern within the physical body. It's in the physical body, but it's very much connected to the flow of the life body, the etheric body, which is why it's connected to the moon. The moon is connected to the watery element. The moon affects the ocean, it affects the tides, and it affects the watery element in the human being, particularly in the woman, with the menstrual cycle. Men are also subject to the influences of the moon, but woman definitely has that. And so you see how it shifts her consciousness too. A woman's, some of you women might be able to speak to this more clearly about the shift in consciousness that takes place. As a man, I know about PMS, for example, which means putting up with men's shit. PMS. But how about other ways that
That's 24/7 though.
yeah, right. Not just once a month.
I don't have that much to speak about that PMS. Never really suffered from that.
But do you notice shift in consciousness with the menstrual cycle, the moon?
Yeah, it's like a cleansing time. Cleansing,
More,
powerful.
something more inward, or something more like, yeah, more inward,
Yeah.
more power within.
At a certain time of the month.
Yeah. And less desire to be outward.
Mm.
And it's a real shift in the center.
So it's like the tide goes out and the tide goes in.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of giggle sometimes because I wonder how conscious it is for individuals, like how connected they are to the shifts changing and if we're really like connecting to it to our fullest potential, like really allowing the seed to bloom in each phase of this expression.
There's a little bit of this like mother archetype, and there's like this sacrifice thing, where it's like, especially on the first day, you're just like, you feel a lot, and a lot of discomfort, and it feels like sacrificial a little bit. Giving your blood to the earth.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think also the way you think about it can make a big difference in your experience of it. Because I can remember suffering a fair bit with my period, and then I was doing some grad studies in philosophy of education or something, and I was reading Castaneda, and they were talking about how at the menstrual time you can see the cracks between the worlds. And it just gave me this, a different kind of perception is available to me at this time. So that's what I started focusing on, and I stopped suffering so much. It was a lot better for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you made the shift inwardly.
I made a shift on how I experienced it.
Okay, that's very empowering. Yeah, that's very participatory. Yeah, that's really a step beyond just going with the flow and directing the flow through higher awareness and consciousness.
Well, when you're on your moon cycle, and the flow is, like we're saying, like a downward draw of menstruation, it's not the time for some that you would insert anything or impede that flow. They talk about just like really letting it happen, and there's individuals who are really big on having like a bleeding blanket or connecting to it, similar to how parents potty train children, and they at a very young age, like they'll start to notice the signals that indicate the child has to go to the washroom, and so without diapers they'll start bringing them to the toilet. The same thing, you can identify and connect to yourself when the flow is starting to happen. You can get into positions that allow it to flow more naturally, where you don't need to have anything like like a pad or a tampon or cloth or whatever you use. That you know when that pull is happening, and you can take action and either absorb, like collect what's being emitted, and then use it for future purposes. The energy and the blood.
Sacred rituals.
Yeah.
Powerful. Yeah, that's so great to invent our own patterns of ritual. That's a whole other subject. Patterns of ritual. Ritualistic patterns. The power of that. In a way, you could say we are the product of the ritualistic patterns of the universe, of the cosmos.
I like that.
To give you an example of that, how the pulse of the cosmos is in you. For every one breath cycle that you take, one inhalation and exhalation, there's 4 heartbeats. That's the average. So for every 18 breaths that you take, that's 72 beats of your heart in 1 minute. And 72 is the number of years that it takes for the vernal point to move 1 degree in the zodiac. 72. The vernal point is the position of the sun against the backdrop of the stars. So 18 breaths per minute times 60 minutes times 24 hours gives us the number 25,590, which is the number of years for the vernal point to move 1 complete cycle around the zodiac, which is also referred to as a Platonic year. So this movement of the sun in its rotation around the vernal equinox, or the Platonic year, rests within you and me in our heartbeat and our breath of 1 to 4. Some have also observed that how our master organs are potentially the product of the cycles of other planets. A connection between Venus and its 9-month circulation through the solar system is reflected in the 9 months of gestation for an embryo. The lungs and Mercury. Mercury orbits around the solar system 4 times a year. Again, there's that 4 pulses of the heart for every 1 breath cycle. The liver and Jupiter. There's a 12-year cycle of Jupiter around the solar system, just as there is a 12-year cycle in the development of the liver, the maturation of the liver in the body. And then, of course, there's a connection between our heart and the sun. The sun is at the center of the solar system. The heart is at the center of our body. The sun rays out its light and its warmth to produce life, just as the heart sends out with its life and its warmth. So, something to contemplate, how what is out there has found its way into the development of us as a center. But what can we do to take that further? Just as you were saying, to take the issue of the menstrual cycle and to work with that. There's a lot we can do to work with cycles and patterns and gestures, curved lines, straight lines. I've really been enjoying reading this book, Towards a New Theory of Architecture, looking at the architectural ideas of Rudolf Steiner, the great late initiate of the last century. And he has a reputation as being quite an inspiration in the architectural world, and many of the Waldorf schools around the world are constructed based on his ideas of organic architecture. And you can see here in this photograph of the Goetheanum, the first building headquarters in Dornach, Switzerland, that the design, the shape of the building has very much an organic, lifelike quality to it, because the buildings that we live in have a tremendous influence on our consciousness. And that's what this is all about. It's about taking that seed of consciousness and letting it grow in a particular kind of environment. So the idea of building buildings that have a particular vibration, shape, and feeling, quality feeling to them, is going to have an influence on the consciousness of the people in it, and it's going to have an influence on the work that takes place within that building.
That was going to be one of my comments earlier about the reflections on this whole thing of patterns, and what you had said, Jill, about like, the streets, was that I look at the patterns of how our buildings and the housing system is now set up, particularly with like condos, and what patterns we get in while moving within that structure. And yeah, the quality of material that were held by the periphery influencing the center in maybe not beneficial ways.
Very contained in a certain way. I mean, being contained is good, you know. In a building you're contained, but in this building that has obviously gestures that are very earthy, it looks almost like a mushroom there. But it's not just about connection to the earth, it's also, again, about connection to the cosmos. You know, a mushroom comes out of the ground seeking connection with the cosmos. And so the buildings should have a grounded feel, but also a reaching feel. And so much of our modern day society has the feeling of a ceiling. It's like ceilings everywhere. And it's brings us to the, you know, the whole thing of a flea circus. You know, a flea circus where they have trained fleas. They keep fleas in a box. When they jump up and they hit the ceiling, and they become trained to think that there's a ceiling there, and then you can take them out of the box and have a flea circus. They'll be jumping around and they won't go anywhere because they think they're still in the box. And we're the same way.
Yeah.
We're like trained fleas with the sense of a ceiling that's there. So yeah, it's all about this architectural formula, form and function, and how form really induces a particular kind of function, which leads me to another subject, that of biogeometry. I've done the advanced training in biogeometry, and one of the things you learn is about biosignatures. Biosignatures are shapes that were developed by the founder of biogeometry, Dr. Ibrahim Karim, and that certain shapes or forms will support a certain function. And every one of our organs has a different form because it's performing a different function. So you can work with biosignatures and apply them to your body to support and enhance the function of the different organs, be the liver, kidney, heart, skin, eyes, what have you. This book is full of all sorts of different forms. So I just opened it up to the page female organs. And pretty sexy. Actually, they're just geometric forms that, when applied to the body, will act as portals. The shape acts as a portal to a transcendental energy to come in with a certain resonance that will enhance the function of that particular organ. Fascinating stuff. I wish I could spend more time on it. I think we've got a talk up on, or we're going to put a talk up on the channel about biogeometry. Because we need to support the physical body, because the physical body is the housing for the subtle bodies. We've got these different bodies, the four main bodies, the physical, the etheric, the astral, and the spirit self, that each have their own cycles, and they each have their own organs. And I'll spend a bit of time looking at that with a biography chart, because working with biography, your personal biography, is to work with patterns. It's to work with cycles. And this is showing the human life cycle, that time of birth, life, and then death. And it's got 4 different tracks. You can fill this in. You can get one of these and you can fill this in by recording what took place according to your different bodies. So on the one track, it's the physical. So basically where you were geographically. You can look at where you were geographically in your biography at the different years. And then there's another one that pertains to the life body, things that were going on in your growth and development, things that may have been a disease or some sort of impediment or what have you. And then the third column is recording what happened to your astral body, really looking at behavioral things, personality things. And then the fourth one is your spiritual track. And by recording this, because it's so interesting, it's the balance between that which is archetypal, because we all have this archetypal journey, but then at the same time we all have a unique journey. No two people have had the same experiences. No two people have had the same life. And so, this image of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly is an amazing picture of what the ego needs to go through. I don't think the ego needs to just give up on itself the way Jim Carrey's doing. That's how he's dealt with his depression and some of the issues in his life, is to just disavow it and say it doesn't exist. But we see in nature that things turn from one thing into another. They go from one state to a higher state. Caterpillar is earthbound, and then the butterfly is freed from that state. And this brings me to another archetypal pattern for the human, known as the hero's journey. Have y'all heard of the hero's journey? Spoken of in depth by Joseph Campbell in a number of his books and interviews online. He talks about the hero's journey as the monomyth. Monomyth. There's just one myth that has many different variations on the theme. But the monomyth has certain archetypal plot points to it. So, for example, the hero is called. He's called to some sort of service. He's called to some sort of task. And he answers the call. He rises up to the call. But in the monomyth, in the hero's journey, there's always this descent. There's always this going down into the ordeals, the trials and tribulations of whatever the task is. He has to face some sort of monster. He has to face some sort of shadow being. I mean, think of all the superheroes. That's the monomyth being played out over and over again. This calling, this response to the call, and then going down and dealing with the dark side, to deal with the opposition. But then the descent is followed by the ascent, right? There's something of a victory, there's something of a transformation, overcoming of the darkness, overcoming of the opposition, which becomes the leverage for the hero to rise up into a new state of being. The hero, the byproduct is that they achieve an apotheosis. Apotheosis means that they rise to a higher state of being, a more deified, a more godlike state of being. And this is not unlike the human journey. If you noticed here, the shape of the human journey is no accident. It's a parabola. Parabola shows this descent down into the belly, into the earth, and then this turning, and then this ascent. And so our lives is about coming in. We're called into the world. We've answered the call, and we acquire the things we need with the bodies. We acquire the instruments and the tools for the journey, and we go in the middle part of our lives, and we deal with the things that face us. Often we face ordeals here, particularly in the 30s, that if we choose to deal with them, will transform us and begin our apotheosis, so that in the third part of our life, there's a blooming, there's an ascent, there's coming into a higher state of being than when we entered this world. And in fact, this wave is actually part of an ongoing wave with ups and downs, up into the spiritual world, the life before that, and likewise up into the spiritual world of death, descent into a next incarnation. So the hero's journey is this ongoing wave of descent and ascent. And this then brings me to a very interesting subject of the Christ archetype. The Christ archetype, which, if you're familiar with the Christ story, follows these plot points of the monomyth, or the hero's journey. Because Christ, if nothing else, he's regarded as a hero, a savior, the Messiah. And as with the monomyth, there's this calling. Beginning of the journey, there was this call into service. So this Christ figure, this Christ archetype, is called into service to save the people. I have a book, don't have it here, but that deals with archetypes for the male psyche. It's called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. It looks at these four quadrants: the king archetype, the warrior archetype, the magician archetype, and the lover. The Christ, as an archetype, fits into those four quadrants quite definitely. Certainly the king archetype, he was called the king of the Jews. He was called the king of kings. The magician, well, the miracle worker. He was healing people. He was turning water into wine and so forth. So he fits into that. And then the warrior archetype, he was certainly that. As a matter of fact, the Jewish people were waiting for someone to rise up like King David and take them into battle and to reclaim the promised land. And then the lover archetype, the Christ certainly fit into that mold as a lover of the people, the lover of all people, the lover unconditionally. So I don't know what your position is on this whole idea of Christ. It doesn't really matter whether you look at Christ as being a historical figure or not. In some ways, it's good to just not get hung up on the historicity of Jesus and just look at this Christ figure as a composite of all archetypes. That the Christ archetype encompasses the king, warrior, magician, lover. He was the wounded healer. He was the teacher. He was all these things. And that it doesn't matter whether the story is true or not. It's like fairy tales. Fairy tales are not true stories, but they still have truth in them. And so does the story of this Christ figure. Think of, this purity of birth, being born of a virgin, having this pure beginning, and then this call into service. And he answers the call. And then he has to go into the world and deal with the opposition. He has to deal with the attacks of darkness. And at times he pulls back and he goes into the mountains and he resists the attacks of darkness. But then at the appointed time, he allows his light to be overcome by darkness. And he goes into a descent. He follows this descent gesture in his life, which leads to a death. But it's an initiation. This thing of the crucifixion is really an initiation that he went through that led to a resurrection of a new nature. He had this immense trust that if he allowed himself to follow the plan of his destiny and his calling, and to even allow himself to be overcome by the darkness, the way Neo is by Mr. Smith in The Matrix, that he'll come out the other end as a new being with an apotheosis. He's raised to a higher stature than he was before. And so this archetypal story, it follows what we see in nature. There's parallels in nature. Just as the caterpillar dies, goes through this crucifixion, and then is reborn as a butterfly. But he's showing it on the human level. And he's showing that this ability as a self, as an ego, to be self-sacrificing and make personal sacrifices to serve the whole ultimately endows you with a higher nature. And this is something that's so missing in our culture. People are so self-serving rather than making personal sacrifices that they're missing the opportunity to transform. Transformation doesn't happen sitting reading books and meditating. Transformation is by giving yourself out in the world. You're going to be transformed in action when you're making sacrifices to serve the whole. And that's basically where I try to come from in my life. I try to daily live a life of serving the whole. When I was doing my spiritual warrior training, I did a 4-year spiritual warrior training in my 20s. 2 years on the field and 2 years in a college in Kansas. And when I first arrived there, they had words and slogans around the campus, and there was one that said, "Self-sacrifice is the passion of great people." Self-sacrifice is the passion of great people. And I'd never seen those words before, and I thought about it, and I went, that makes sense. That seems logical. That great people are going to be passionate about sacrificing aspects of their own life to serve the whole. It just makes sense. And I think a lot of people are missing that as a thought in their mind, and they live for themselves. And what happens is that the seed stays as a seed. They're not putting themselves into the environment of the world so they can grow, which is why they came here. That's why you incarnated, was to put yourself in the environment of the world so you could grow. But if you're just a seed that's here and not participating, then you're not with the plan of the plant on the planet. And you're not allowing yourself to go through the descent and the death of the lower ego, with the lowercase e, to transform into a higher ego with a capital E. The caterpillar turning into a butterfly. And so we look at the opportunity we have here as a seed to germinate, to grow. By looking at our lives, looking at the patterns of the human journey, the hero's journey, to descend as a seed into the earth and then to bloom. And that blooming is what leads to consciousness. Just want to end off with a comment on how the arts, putting ourselves into a re-spiritualized working with the arts, is putting ourselves in an environment that will allow our nature to grow and bloom. And in the arts we can find new ritual. The arts, when we approach the arts in a new spiritualized way, it becomes a new ritual. And that's the amazing thing about being human in this day and time, is we can create our own rituals, we can devise our own symbols, and we can assign our own meaning to things. In the past it was given to us. It was given to us by priests and priestesses, by pharaohs, by teachers and gurus, kings and queens. They gave us rituals, they gave us symbols, and they assigned meaning to things. But now you can take the power to do that yourself. The key with that, though, is the rituals and the symbols and the meaning. We want to align it with the archetypes. We want to align it with the patterns that inform the manifest realm, so that from the metaphysical level the physical level can be transformed by what rays through from these archetypes. And when we are aligned with the archetype, then there'll be alchemical movement. There'll be alchemical movement, there'll be transformation that takes place, because the archetypes acts as agents of alchemical movement. And then ultimately, that dormant seed of divinity within will awaken. It'll go through the death of the lower ego. It'll germinate, and then it will fructify. You will fructify yourself and produce growth that will lead to a blooming of consciousness. Thank you all for coming out tonight.